Welcome to RTV Your TV. I'm Donna Wallach, and I'm the guest host for today's show. Our guest today is Dr. Sharat Jilin. Dr. Sharat Jilin is the president of the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. He writes on global political economy, the Middle East and South Asia, labor migration, and public health. His articles are found on Counterpunch, Dissident Voice, Countercurrents, Monthly Review, Electronic Intifada, Z Magazine, among others. He recently spent a week in Tahrir Square, ground zero for the Egyptian revolution. He will discuss with us how the unprecedented uprising in Egypt began, where the people's movement might lead, and its potential impact on the Middle East. Welcome, Sharat. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So when did you arrive in Egypt, and how long were you there?
Well, I arrived in Egypt on the 28th of January, just 3 days after the beginning of the uprising there. And I was there for a little over a week. I mean, I really wasn't planning to be there for the Egyptian revolution. I was actually going there planning to go there much earlier to get into the Gaza Strip, and this happened.
So what was your first impressions upon arriving in Cairo?
Well, the first impressions I had upon arriving was first of all, nobody was using their mobile telephones because mobile telephone service was down. And I later found out when I got to my hotel that internet service was also down. As I was going in to the city from the airport, I saw many burnt out police vans along the way. And then as we got to the center of the city, there was this large high-rise building, 15 stories, that was burning. And it had just been set fire a little while earlier. And it turned out to be the headquarters of the ruling political party of Hosni Mubarak, that is the National Democratic Party. And that fire continued to burn for another 4 days, and nobody came to put it out.
So you lived in the Middle East for 5 years in the 70s and the 80s. And based on your experience and your understanding of Egyptian history, why do you think the Egyptian people are so unhappy with their government?
Well, the Egyptian people have had a lot of pride, particularly during the Nasser period, when Egypt was the leader of the non-aligned movement. And then the second president, Anwar al-Sadat, was assassinated in 1981, and Hosni Mubarak took over as president. It was under those circumstances that he and his parliament imposed the emergency laws that have been in force for the past 30 years. And these laws have been extremely repressive. In fact, they've become increasingly so, particularly in the 1990s. And there's been, for example, a ban on peaceful assembly, that no more than 6 people can gather together in a public place. And there's a ban on independent trade unions. So as you can see in this video, this is how some of the people in the square viewed this repression.
موجودين النهارده عشان نعبر عن نبض الشعب المصري اللي بقاله أكتر من 50 سنة تحت الدكتاتورية اللي انتقلت معاه من عهد من جمال عبد الناصر لأنور السادات، وجات أيامنا اسودت أكتر وأكتر في عهد المأفون الراحل بمشيئة الله تعالى اللي ربنا عز وجل يرينا فيه يعني عجائب قدرته. هذا الرئيس الذي أفسد مصر، فتزاوج الفساد بين السلطة وبين رأس المال، فصار فسادا لا حدود له كما ترى وكما يعلم القاصي والداني. مصر التي تعد من أغنى بلاد العالم في الثروات الطبيعية وموقعها الجغرافي ومن الناحية السياحية والآثار وما إلى ذلك والبترول والغاز الطبيعي وجميع الثروات المتعددة، تجد اليوم أن شبابها هم أفقر شباب على مستوى العالم، وكل ذلك ناتج عن ذاك الدكتاتور المستبد الذي لن نرحل من هذا المكان إلا بعد أن يعلن رحيل نظامه كامل وليس هو فقط.
The Egyptian people are not just frustrated with the repression, but also with the corruption in the government. And this has led to a tremendous disparity in wealth, where you have a country which is basically a poor country and an unprecedented number of billionaires. And in fact, the family of Hosni Mubarak is now believed to be worth anywhere from $40 to $70 billion. I mean, this is an incredible amount, and so the people of Egypt are very concerned that there's an elite that is just simply taking all the wealth out of the country and leaving everybody else in poverty. And this is what another one of the protesters had to say.
These people and this country have a lot of money. Look at the tourists, look at the Suez Canal. We have a lot of resources of money, but we cannot see this. So we didn't need any money from one. We are a country of civilization for 7,000 years. We didn't need money from anyone. But all the problem is that the people who is ruling this country are the richest people. There must be someone from the people themselves. First, Mubarak must leave. We are going to make elections. We are well educated. We know what we are going to want. We didn't do any harm to our country because this is our country.
In December 2009, you traveled to Egypt for the Gaza Freedom March, and you ended up spending almost a month in Egypt then. During your time there, what did you witness? What did you see was the daily life of the majority of Egyptians?
Well, for one thing, I did travel outside of Cairo and going through the countryside, as you can see in this photo. The Nile Valley is very rich. It's a very rich area, but the landholding size has become increasingly small as the population has grown, and people have been affected by the penetration of foreign capital, by globalization, which has brought multinational corporations to sell the farmers high-yielding varieties that require increased inputs of fertilizers and pesticides. And the cost of these, of course, has driven many of these farmers into greater debt. And so the condition of the common people, 60% of the population of Egypt live in the countryside, has not really improved. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the repression. And I was there, as you mentioned, for the Gaza Freedom March at the end of 2009 and beginning of 2010, and many of the Egyptians wanted to join our march, and we were about 1,400 people from 42 countries. And because we were foreigners, the Egyptian government allowed us to protest, but still used sometimes brutal tactics to contain our demonstrations. When Egyptians tried to join in, the Egyptian police would enter the demonstrations and try to filter them out as best they could. And then we don't know what happened to these Egyptians. They were taken away.
So you saw them being dragged away?
Yes, yes. And as you can see in this video, this is how we were treated, even how foreigners were treated by the Egyptian police and by the Central Security Forces.
الجيش المسلمان شعب المسلمان جيش المسلمان شعب المسلمان جيش المسلمان Non, non, laisse tomber, c'est pas grave, laisse tomber, الشعب المسلمان.
And what they were saying was the Egyptian people are with us, and the Egyptian army is with us. It was attempts to increase the support of those from the soldiers, but of course the Egyptian people, when they have these protests, face much more brutal repression than we did, and they would have been arrested and taken to jail and tortured in jail. So this is just a little taste of what the Egyptian had to face on a daily basis.
The American mainstream media have often portrayed the Egyptian popular uprising beginning on the 25th of January 2011 is spontaneous. However, it is clear that they were well organized. Can you give us some background on how these mass protests began?
Yes, of course, it goes back a long way. I mean, the Egyptian people have a history of being, politically active, and in particular, if you look at the past decade, there's been much activity, and this really goes back to the Egyptian the movement for change, otherwise known as the Kifaya movement. And this was a movement that consisted of a broad range of people in Egypt, ranging from the left to liberal secular elements to the Islamists. And all of them were united in seeking a change in the way that Egypt is governed. And in 2008, we had some of the largest labor demonstrations and strikes that Egypt has ever seen. Mm-hmm. In the industrial town to the north of Cairo, called El Mohalla, this is a huge textile center, and 25,000 workers went on strike there in April. And of course, this was illegal. The government tried to repress that, but they couldn't. There were just too many people out on the streets. And the youth decided that they were going to go out in support of those workers. Awesome. And so they started a movement called the 6th of April Youth Movement. And this movement is one of the organizations that was behind the uprising that began on the 25th of January of this year. And then last year, in 2010, a student in Alexandria was in an internet cafe, and the police came in and demanded that everybody show their IDs. And the student refused. He said, "Why should I show you my ID? I'm just here minding my own business." So the police grabbed him, took him away to a hidden place, and beat him to death. And the photos of what had happened to him managed to be put up on the internet, on Facebook, and a page was created called Kulna Khalid Said, meaning we are all Khalid Said. And in a short time, that Facebook page received 400,000 friends. And once the uprising in January began, that Facebook, the number of friends increased by another 150,000 wow. to 550,000 friends. So it was amazing, but this played a crucial role in the mobilization of January 25th. The other factor, of course, is what happened in Tunisia. Tunisia was a tremendous boost to the Egyptian people, and it gave them a sense that they could do it too, that they could get rid of their corrupt leader, just as the Tunisian people had done. And January 25th was chosen because this is normally celebrated in Egypt as Police Day. But the people of Egypt said, we're not going to celebrate the police. So instead they were going to go out and protest on that day. And when the protests started happening, when people started coming out onto the streets from 4 different locations in Cairo and in other cities, people were expecting a few hundred, maybe a few thousand at most. But in Cairo alone, 50,000 people came out on January 25th. And that was a tremendous boost to the movement. And so in the following days, more and more people kept on coming out, despite the fact that the police used more and more repression, and probably more than half of the total number of people who were killed were in fact killed by the police during the first 4 days of the Egyptian uprising. One of the protesters, Muhammad al-Fattah, tells us how he got started in these demonstrations. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
So I came the first time after praying in Ramses Square. The police authority put bombs in us, and bombs smoke, and we was tearing, we was weeping, we was peaceful. We want to say simply, Mubarak, go, this is enough. But he didn't understand, he wouldn't understand, he didn't want to understand, and he will not ever understand. So I have a family, I have 3 girls, so I stayed Friday to maybe an hour, and I was afraid to complete with the people, so I went to my family. Since this time till now, I am looking at the TVs, still since they broke the arm, the Mubarak arm, which the police authority. I was very happy. I came here to support our people and to say this is a new generation. We have right to put our authority. We have the right to say what we believe to say. America, don't be afraid from us. We didn't hurt you. We hate only our thieves, which you put on us, especially Mubarak. So let him leave, please.
He talks about breaking the arm of the police, and what happened on January 28th was that, well, by January 28th, the people came out into the streets and were nonviolent. But when the police attacked them, the people had to defend themselves, and they did so not by killing any of the police, but rather by burning the police stations. So nearly every police station in the entirety of Egypt, a country of 85 million people, each and almost every one of those police stations was burnt. And so this is why the government decided that it had no choice but to pull all of the police off the streets in the entire country. And then they brought the military in to be there and monitor the situation. And the military, unlike the Egyptian police, have a history of never being against the Egyptian people. And this is why the people tried and did, bond with the soldiers who came in to guard strategic locations within the cities, and also the areas of protest. And within these areas of protest, you can see in this next video how this was one of many marches that would take place inside the Maidan al-Tahrir, the Liberation Square. There would be many rallies, many marches taking place simultaneously. Let's take a look.
According to the Egyptian government, over 300 people were killed during the 18 days of protests throughout the country. Yet the protests themselves were and continue to be remarkably nonviolent. How do you account for this?
Well, the people went out into the streets absolutely with the intent of being nonviolent, that this would all be nonviolent civil disobedience. And first, in the first 4 days, as we have mentioned, they were attacked brutally by the police. When the police were taken off the streets, things settled down. The protests remained nonviolent for the next few days until February 2nd. And on February 2nd, the internet went back up very briefly, so that the government could mobilize its supporters. And these supporters, together with secret police, organized attacks on the demonstrators in the square and in other locations throughout the country. And of course they used violence. They threw stones, they brought sticks, they rode in on horses and camels with whips, and hundreds of people in Cairo alone were badly injured. There were a lot of head injuries at this time. And so after that, the people in the square decided that they wanted to maintain the square as a sanctuary of nonviolence. And so what they did was that they guarded the square and they set up checkpoints to ensure that infiltrators don't get into the square, and they would pat people down to ensure that nobody brings any weapons into the square. So the square became a safe place even for women and children to protest. And as we can see in this next video, here are some women who were leading some of the chants at night and feeling perfectly safe.
You spent every day for more than a week in Tahrir Square. What was it like there? What was the mood?
Well, one thing that was quite remarkable was that people had shed their fears. I mean, after 30 years, people were no longer afraid to come out, and more every day, more and more people were coming, and people who had never protested before in their lives. At the same time, there was, of course, everybody was angry at the government, and they really were passionate that Mubarak must leave and that his entire regime must go. And along with that, there was also a celebration of unity. I mean, it was a tremendous feeling of so many, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and on several days, 1 million people in one place, united. It was a tremendous feeling. And as I said, in the square there were many marches and rallies going on simultaneously. There was no harassment of women inside the square, and this was going on for 24 hours a day. And as you can see in the next video, there were people camped out throughout the night in the square.
What did the Egyptians tell you when they found out that you are an American?
Well, first they said, welcome to Egypt. But they always raised the question of why does the U.S. government support Mubarak? Why does the U.S. government give the Mubarak regime weapons and arms? And so they asked us that the government should support the people, not the dictator.
Well, it is clear that the protesters wanted President Mubarak and the entire regime to leave, total regime change. What do you understand the majority of Egyptians want to replace the Mubarak administration?
Well, first of all, this movement, as I said before, is a very broad-based movement. And it includes the leftists, it includes the Muslim Brotherhood, it includes 4 days, and nobody came to put it out.
So you lived in the Middle East for 5 years in the 70s and the 80s. And based on your experience and your understanding of Egyptian history, why do you think the Egyptian people are so unhappy with their government?
Well, the Egyptian people have had a lot of pride, particularly during the Nasser period, when Egypt was the leader of the non-aligned movement. And then the second president, Anwar Sadat, was assassinated in
In Egypt, and how long were you there?
Well, I arrived in Egypt on 28th of January, just 3 days after the beginning of the uprising there. And I was there for a little over a week. I mean, I really wasn't planning to be there for the Egyptian Revolution. I was actually going there planning to go there much earlier to get into the Gaza Strip, and this happened.
So what was your first impressions upon arriving in Cairo?
Well, the first impressions I had upon arriving was first of all, nobody was using their mobile.
Welcome to Our TV, Your TV. I'm Donna Wallach, and I'm the guest host for today's show. Our guest today is Dr. Sharat Jilin. Dr. Sharat Jilin is the president of the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. He writes on global political economy.
Mobile telephones, because mobile telephone service was down. And I later found out when I got to my hotel that internet service was also down. As I was going in to the city from the airport, I saw many burnt out police vans along the way. And then as we got to the center of the city, there was this large high-rise building, 15 stories, that was burning. And it had just been set fire a little while earlier. And it turned out to be the headquarters of the ruling political party of Hosni Mubarak, that is the National Democratic Party. And that fire continued to burn for another 4 years.
The Middle East and South Asia, labor migration, and public health. His articles are found on Counterpunch, Dissident Voice, Countercurrents, Monthly Review, Electronic Intifada, Z Magazine, among others. He recently spent a week in Tahrir Square, ground zero for the Egyptian Revolution. He will discuss with us how the unprecedented uprising in Egypt began, where the people's movement might lead, and its potential impact on the Middle East. Welcome, Sharat. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So when did you arrive